When we think of space, we naturally think of the stars, solar systems, galaxy, the distant reaches of the universe.
But space has another dimension to explore, not outward, but inward, into all the basic elements of everything there is on our planet.
Here, a miniature world of space exists, a world filled with constant motion, one that went undetected for centuries. It is the world of the atom.
Hello everyone, welcome to the Free Radical Media Podcast once again. Today we're going to be talking with Meriana Dinkova. I'm going to read now from a brief introduction from the website of the Amazonian Shamanism Conference. Meriana Dinkova is a licensed marriage and family therapist and life and relationship coach in private practice in San Francisco. For the last 16 years, she has studied and practiced a variety of psychotherapeutic, meditative, and transformational methods involving the connection between spirit and body, and the ways our attention influences our experience, particularly in the realms of connection, mindfulness, and consciousness exploration. Meriana, how are you doing?
Good. Good to be on the show.
Well, first of all, why don't you tell us a little bit about your work, and what you're doing out in San Francisco, your practice.
Cool. I've been in private practice since, I started seeing clients in 2001 and have been licensed since 2007. And I'm a marriage and family therapist as well as a life coach. And I have been geek in the realms of working with consciousness and developing tools to work with the mind as well as with different experiences. And I have a variety of trainings, some more right-wing in psychodynamic and cognitive behavioral therapy as well as DBT, and some are more experience-centered and mindfulness-centered, like Hakomi and voice dialogue and RCS. And I have developed a variety of tools to work with people with the mind as well as with the direct experience, which has been really interesting. Because a lot of psychotherapy works mostly with the stories of the mind, and I do work a lot of it also experientially when I do go into the fabric of experience. And some of my favorite clients have been also people who do the variety of medicine work. So I see all kinds of people in person as well as over Skype. And in the last years, one of my specialties has been also working with people who work with ayahuasca or do retreats, or medicine retreats, or have different experiences with altered states of consciousness. And I often help them before and after journeys they do, or as well as I have been doing some retreats in Peru with shamans from either from Peru or from different places who usually have a lot of experience, who do ayahuasca work, or one time also ayahuasca in San Pedro. And I have developed a system of workshops to prepare people for the experience, to give them tools to navigate the altered states, as well as to work with different issues that come up between ceremonies, and then do also help with integration at the end, which I have been super passionate about, and they have been a lot of fun.
Yeah, it sounds like a really interesting practice, and it's very different, from mainstream psychotherapy, right? I mean, this is, you're kind of coming at it from a different point of view, right?
I have integrated the main points of mainstream therapy as well as added my own cells.
Yeah.
Which is, I've been actually having a serious crush on my business, so to say.
Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting that people in the underground sort of psychological scene, there seems to be more and more of them especially utilizing, entheogenic substances. And it kind of makes me curious, how was it that you were first exposed to the use of entheogens, in particular ayahuasca?
That was during my early 20s in Ibiza. My first journey was in my very early 20s. And that was one of the most amazing, deeply transformative experiences of my life. I mean, I had some experience with psychedelics before. In some ways, I had signed up to be an architect. And then with 19, I read LSD and Psychotherapy, the book from Stanislav Grof. And I had such a deep resonance that I switched majors and went into psychology. It was the feeling of when I grow up, I want to have something to do with this. And it was funny that later in life, when I studied at CIIS and the California Institute of Integral Studies and did my master's in somatics, I actually did have Stan Grof as one of my professors and wrote a paper on ayahuasca. But also my experience was that very few, I have worked with a whole lot of shamans in the meantime, or at least I have experienced the work with a lot of shamans all over the world. And only the very first shaman in Ibiza actually said something around what to expect in the experience. And I remember her saying, by the way, you might die, and if you die, that's fine. I promise you will be here in the morning, and enjoy the experience, take notes, let yourself have it, don't freak out. I promise you'll be back, you'll be fine. So I actually did die that night, and it was one of the most amazingly beautiful experiences that took a lot of my fears of death and the other realms away. But I was amazed how she was the only one who ever mentioned something about it. And how many of my friends who have drunk with different shamans have the death experiences, freak out, and spend half of the night fighting it, versus feeling like, yay, I got the cosmic jackpot, I'm getting to experience the death experiences in a safe way. And that was one of the first things that got me actually passionate about helping people navigate and have a deeper knowledge of what can be expected in the ayahuasca experience, as well as I started developing a collection of tools actually a long time ago, started somewhere in my late teens, early 20s, and by now I have quite a body of work, which helps with different techniques for navigating altered states, with navigating emotional states, with working with different realms and so on.
Oh, yeah, that's that's fascinating. I'd like you to take us through, like, for example, when you're doing your workshops in Peru, what's the experience like? And essentially, like, what are some of these tools? Like, what are you doing with people, to facilitate this whole experience in a positive way?
I mean, just to also add, the most I've heard a shaman explain about the ayahuasca experience, apart from that first one, was you might have some visions and you might have some emotions. And that was it. So I have developed a whole system which helps people first prepare for the experience and have a psychological toolkit, know how to work with intentions and how to set different intentions in a good way. Because ayahuasca has an interesting way she can bring you to so many other worlds and parallel dimensions, but then if you do have intentions, often at the very end, although sometimes at the beginning, she goes like, okay, now that we're done with the multiple universes, that thing about your intentions, here's the download. So it helps a lot she has a way of almost interacting with where you're at, and she's one of the greatest healers in some ways, and one of the cutest descriptions of ayahuasca I've heard as a joke was that she's psychotherapy and steroids. So in some ways, adding the psychotherapy with the psychotherapy and steroids has been actually a really interesting combo. But some of the tools are about preparation. Some of the tools are about recognizing emotional things that can come up. I call it emotional virusware, since a lot of us come with almost emotional viruses, which we have gotten in one or another way through upbringing, through parents, through genetics, to go into fear, to go into self-criticism, to go into different emotions that don't serve us, or though the software is very active, and how to switch to different places, how to use different tools to work with the experience, and especially how to interact with the experience itself. Because my experience is that when people go deeply in the ayahuasca space, it can be a little bit like being in hyperspace slash, I use the comparison with the movie The Matrix, where sometimes I remember at some point one of the people they're going like, hey, I need the download to how to operate this helicopter model, blah, blah, blah. And it was straight from the Matrix, download complete. So often people have much more ability to interact with the space or to ask questions and help and get guidance and get support than they know. So it's often what gets told to a lot of people is how to surrender to the experience, which is beautiful, which is one of the main tools, but also how to just trust the shaman, which is okay, but often the shamans, A, don't speak the language, B, it's hard to express yourself in those states. Although, I mean, I have worked with some amazing shamans, and C, they come from a completely different culture. So I also know that in some of my experiences when they did call the spirits of Iemanjá and Oshun in one of the ayahuasca retreats I did in Brazil, I didn't know who they were. I didn't know that one is the goddess of the ocean and the god of the blah. So I didn't feel protected by them. I didn't feel like the archetypes from the culture could actually have my back. Right. Or sitting in a teepee and listening and them calling the bear. I'm like, okay, I've seen a bear. But in a zoo, calling the eagle, I'm like, okay, I've seen an eagle. And by the time they got to the coyote, I was like, I don't even know what that looks like. I don't feel protected by those archetypes. Right. So I'm also helping people develop or work with their own archetypes. And with, for a lot of people, they feel much closer with Spider-Man or with Yoda or with the spirit of their grandmother than they do with the spirit of coyote or with Iemanjá. So in some ways, I also help people to develop their own support team inside and forces they can call upon for strength. I work with some somatic tools as well as with some transpersonal tools, which can be super powerful in those states. And also we work with different psychological issues so they can have a better handle of what exactly to bring to the ayahuasca experience. Since she's going to do whatever she's going to do anyway, but if we're a little more specific and have a more specific area we want to work on, she tends to pay attention. Not always, but often people have gotten amazing answers when they're more specific with the areas they want to address. And also how to not get into negative mind spins, because a lot of our negative thought patterns, when applied or when happening in the intensified space of the ayahuasca experience, can create really negative experiences. So some of the tools are how to create and how to avoid or at least not create a negative trip, and how to maximize your experience and the learning from it.
And you were talking about the shamans themselves and how there's good ones and bad ones, and I had a pretty in-depth conversation recently with a friend, and we were talking about how, in a lot of these cultures in the Amazon, shamanism is almost synonymous with, con artistry
brujeria, right?
or even worse, sorcery. It's something that isn't, there's a shadow side to it. And there's a lot of fakes and there's a lot of phonies, but finding the true shaman is, makes all the difference. And I was just wondering, how do you distinguish between someone that's authentic and someone that's just brewing up ayahuasca,
Right. Experience with them helps. Also talking to people who have more experience with them or through references, getting to know the person, getting to know the space they create. And there is a difference. Somebody can be an amazing shaman, and that does not mean that they're an enlightened human being.
Right.
Or on the other hand, I have heard some horror stories about shamans completely abusing ayahuasca to get to people's money or to give them huge doses, and then when they start going towards the death experience, coming with a bag and going, I know what's making you die. You just have to give me your jewelry because it's making you die. So right. To say. But it's also true that shamans are just people. So I also realized that just because it's another skill set, and just because you're good at that does not mean that you have to be an amazing human being or a good business person to work with. So I went to the 9th Amazonian Conference last July, and I did the workshops there with David J. Brown on navigating altered states, and I got to know quite a few really good shamans. So I got to have a lot of personal experience with them, and one of them was the one I did the retreat last December with. Her name is Adela, and she was 78 or something, or 70 a lot. So she's been doing it since she was 11, and she was also the teacher of Alan Shoemaker, the organizer of the conference, and she was so much fun. She had such a beautiful light. She became one of my almost models of how you can be fun and almost hot for 70-something. She was a lady. Wow, really powerful shaman. She worked it, and she had so much fun with being feminine and with being almost like a lady shaman. And also there was another one who I met there, Raul, who I worked with in February, who had a completely different approach, but also really powerful skill set.
That's interesting. And now, therapists like you that are sort of carrying the torch and bringing it into this cultural paradigm, it's an interesting transition, in the different expressions that the medicine has.
Right, and I find it interesting that you try to give people, like you were saying, sometimes the cultural archetypes, they just don't match up. It's such a different, it's so different from like North American culture, right? Or Western culture. And it's interesting that you kind of give people tools to try to make that transition a little easier. I think that's interesting.
Yeah, and it's fun. I call it consciousness hacking for some of the tools, since some of them are really powerful and they can make a lot of difference, and they can give people a lot of resources and also have a little bit of a GPS which direction you're going. Because sometimes it can make sense working with the problem, but sometimes working with the resource or with the outcome you want is so much more powerful. Mm. So also knowing when you're going down a beaten path of problems versus how to switch towards solutions, how to ask the right questions, and how to listen for answers, because we are so trained to figure out stuff with our minds, while we have such a pathway to direct knowledge that we so often don't use while we're busy figuring things out. And in the ayahuasca experience, those pathways are so open. So also how to ask the right questions and listen the right way, so it becomes almost like a personal relationship with the medicine. And people get amazing results. I've heard really good things about the combination of the journeys and the workshops, and how the combination together provides a really whole support structure for having the experience.
How are it seems that it's really only been about 50 years now that America has really known about the whole ayahuasca practice, in the mainstream. How are the shamans down in South America taking this? Having an ayahuasca conference. How are they? How do they take this whole almost, not glorification's not the right word, but bringing it to the light of the more mainstream in America, and having a lot of Westerners come down and do the ayahuasca with them? How do they react to that?
My experience was very positive. I know that, I have worked with clients and, in private practice too. One of the things to watch out for is that male shamans, especially in the Peruvian culture, still are men who are in a way sexually suppressed. So also that's one of the boundaries I have learned the importance about, is how to make sure that that's the male tendency of wanting to take the appreciation and the adoration of female participants and use it in a sexual way or connect in a sexual way doesn't get abused. There were some experiences that happened, as well as experiences, especially that one of my private clients brought, who was deeply traumatized from a different shaman who I've never worked with, but he's very famous. having sexual experiences with her, in a way, really engaging her, really coming in with the whole transference of I'm the shaman, I'm the bringer of the wisdom, so to say, and then being like a little boy when it comes to sexual integrity or to being there as a man and abusing the transference. So that's one of the things to watch out for, I've learned.
It's like a similar correlation to the gurus in India when that became when they got introduced into the West, a lot of them exploiting a lot of people's, I guess, willingness to go and experience, what it was that they had to experience. How involved are groups like the Santo Daime, the Uneo de Vegetal, even the Native American Church in these conferences and down in Brazil? What are those communities like?
I did not. I see them being involved at the conference. On the other hand, they can have really strong communities. I have had one ceremony with a really traditional Santo Daime church. It was not my cup of tea. It was a lot of, they told us how to move, how to clap. They had the uniforms and how to sing, and we had to hold these books in Portuguese, and we had to sing with the music. So at some point, the letters were jumping out of the book, and you had to sing. My body wanted to do mudras, and I was supposed to do 1, 2, 3 clap. And so in some ways, I know in my experience, the Santo Daime, the really traditional one, was so structured that I would not have as much from the experience as I wanted. But as the conference goes, I didn't see them represented. Although, as far as I know, also Alan has a church or some kind of church organization that helps people being able to work with the medicine under religious protection.
I've heard the Santo Daime compared to a more ecstatic type of Christian, a lot of movement and a lot of what's the Christian group that's very
The evangelicals.
Evangelicals, that's it. Yeah. But one of the interesting things is that the structure that they have versus in a shaman setting where you're sort of going on your own visionary quest.
Mm-hmm.
Would you say that the shaman setting allows for people to have more personal growth and experience it more fully than all the types of churches that use these types of substances like the Uneo de Vegetal, the Santo Daime, and all them? In your experience, which one would you think, or which one would you say people get the most out of?
As I said, I have had only one experience with the Santo Daime Church, where there was really in a really traditional setting, so it was extremely structured, and there is a sweet spot between no structure and structure. And I think people can use some structure, although too much structure can influence the experience. On the other hand, I know that a lot of their work is kind of more for planetary healing and for global healing than for personal healing. And a lot of the work that most shamans do focuses on personal healing and people going into themselves and going where they're at while being supported by music and supported by other factors. So I think they also slightly focus on different things. I think it's really helpful to have a good shaman when doing some of those experiences. And yes, there is place for doing it outside of a structured environment or outside of a ceremony. You have to have a lot of experience because she can be a tricky one, but she can be also really beautiful.
Oh, yeah. Wait,
Yes.
you said you work with San Pedro as well. How prevalent is San Pedro down in South America?
In Peru, it was really prevalent. And again, I don't work with San Pedro, particularly the shaman I did the last retreat with. That was one of the things he worked with, and it was super fun. We had 3 ayahuasca ceremonies, which were really deep and were really focused on deep personal work. And the San Pedro ceremony was a party. People were doing cuddle puddles and animal noises and having a lot of fun. So it was actually a really beautiful kind of an ending part of the retreat. And it brought up a lot of the communal spirit and the goofiness and the silliness, which was good after a lot of serious personal work. But again, I do give tools for navigating altered states, and I work with I create the framework and the emotional support, and also work with different topics. But then the shamans are the ones who bring the brew and do the actual work during the ceremony. And I have 2 upcoming retreats, one in July with Ricardo Amaringo in his center close to Iquitos, and he's really well known. And that one is going to be only ayahuasca. And another one in December in Tarapoto with also a very famous shaman who asked me to keep his identity private, since he does travel a lot internationally and works in many different countries, but also he uses ayahuasca and master plants, as well as Ricardo also uses master plants. So I have never tried the master plant diet, but I'm really looking forward to it, because that's a whole different addition to working with grandma herself.
And they use the master cleanse along with the ayahuasca then?
It's not master cleanse. I mean, master cleanse is a particular kind of cleanse, and they work with master plants. So they're different categories of plants that are personally selected for each participant, that bring out different emotions, work on different organs, work on different states of consciousness that person needs, and it's a part of their diet between ayahuasca ceremonies. So it's like an addition to working with the medicine.
Oh, that's interesting.
Do the shamans themselves, how strict is the diet followed? I've heard different accounts. Some people take it very seriously while others really don't.
And my experience, the shamans themselves don't. More often than not. On the other hand, the shaman I will be working with in December, he was telling me when I did do some work with him how he lost 3 or 4, I think 4 girlfriends over having to do this 6 months long dietas in which he has to do the master plans, the diet, and not have sex. So girlfriends had really hard time sticking around. And I know that also Adela, who worked in who was the older woman as well as the second shaman I worked with, they had long periods. I think she had 3 years alone in the jungle dieting with different plants or something. And huge part of the shaman training. And she said that some of the diet is more important for the shamans than the participants. That almost the diet and getting completely pure and completely in tune and knowing how to communicate with different plants, was more important on the shaman side. Although there are certain things that can be really dangerous when combined with ayahuasca. So there are certain things really to avoid, like red wine, certain cheeses, and different foods. For sure, medications. I had once a cheese sandwich shortly before a ceremony, and I spent most of the ceremony in the bathroom. So there is also some real valid chemical and things about like certain foods to really avoid.
And it's interesting, the whole concept of these shamans following these very strict, pilgrimages out into the jungle. Are they alone? Are they living with tribal societies? I mean, 3 years is a long time to just, how far away from society were they?
And in my understanding, that was alone.
Wow.
Yeah, it's almost like hermitism.
Yeah, I think the aloneness is a part of the diet almost. And I know different shamans probably work differently with that. And in the 6 months diets that the person who I'm going to be working in December was going through, I don't think it was about isolation. It was more about specific plants and specific food and abstaining from sex. But some of the more hardcore diets also include isolation, from what I understand.
That's very, very interesting.
Yeah, it is. It seems like there are a lot of different, kind of a lot of different strains of thought in shamanism, even just in, Peru or one region, right? I mean, is it shaman to shaman? Is it tribe to tribe? Where do these traditions come from? I mean, because it seems like there's a various ideas about how these things are conducted.
Yeah, I have heard very different theories. The most hilarious one was that the first white people who came to work with the tribes deep into the jungle, didn't have medicine. So when they got sick, they were given ayahuasca. And when they came back, there was the question of, so ayahuasca is so great and it healed you great. So what is the diet around it? Like, what did you do? What didn't you do when you were doing it? And they were like, well, we didn't have any salt, so I guess no salt. We didn't have any sugar in the jungle, so I guess no sugar. Our wives were around, we didn't get laid, so I guess no sex. I mean, I wouldn't say that, and I'm sure that there are many also different very valid reasons for the diet too, and there are many different opinions. There are the cynics and there are the deep believers, and often it's the shamans themselves who have the Coca-Cola before ayahuasca or a steak before the journey, or something like that. So I've seen that there is something to preparing yourself, and especially, yes, there are some foods really to avoid, and there is some medication that can be almost life-threatening if combined with ayahuasca, especially certain antidepressive or other medications. So I'm also really careful screening people and knowing where they're at and what medications they're taking, or what psychological condition or physical condition they're in. But I know that the diet thing there's some complete believers and there are people who make fun of it. So I don't know, but I've seen representatives from very different camps as the diet goes.
When you were saying earlier about helping people, integrate these experiences they have, what types of models do you use? Do you follow any of Stan Grof's work, or with Carl Jung with the Archetypes, explaining some of the imagery that they see? How exactly do you go about helping people integrate the experiences they have?
I have different systems, and some of them is it's easy to use ayahuasca as what I call spiritual mouthwash. Go and have the experience, come back and not bring the knowledge back. So I help people identify the deeper things, the knowledge they have brought, as well as the states that they have experienced. And then the biggest thing is remembering to use that knowledge. And I have a series of experience-centered exercises on how to use that self, which a few days ago was one with God, or knew everything about self-love and forgave your parents. I mean, people have really deeply transformational experiences, or knew all about the oneness of the universe and how to use that self, which was you, and the knowledge that you had in your body in those moments, like your cells were there, and how to use that self as your future best friend almost, and how to integrate that in your life and use that as a resource you can turn to. I have had personally some amazing experiences that helped me switch from really negative states by evoking some of the selves from ayahuasca and evoking the knowledge that they held and the wisdom that they were holding, and working with them in particular ways that I also teach people. And that's partially working with past self work, but it's so important. And I had 4 of my personal clients come to the first retreat, and also some of them to the second one. And it's amazing also in the follow-up, in the psychotherapy, when we use the knowledge of those states and what amazing resource they can be. And people forget to use them. It's almost like having the key to all kinds of secret treasures and then forgetting about the box and about the key.
Oh, yeah. I was going to say, in the Western world, it's very hard to incorporate a lot of these experiences. It's 2 different worlds clashing very hardly in some places.
Yeah.
How do you help? What is the way that you're able to bridge the gap between the Western world and the shamanic trance world?
I have a series. When it comes to the post ayahuasca ceremonies experiences, which I work with my personal clients as well as with people from all over the world over Skype, since I do help also people who are not in the San Francisco areas, who have had some experience and want to integrate them more into their life and want to use them as a deeper resource. And I love doing that work too. But I do work with different experience-centered exercises. I do work with a slightly changed version of the voice dialogue, or work with parts, in which we use some of the parts or some of the selves who have had those experiences and the wisdom that they hold as an advisor, as a friend, as a helper in whatever issues they're dealing with. Because it's easy for us to get stuck into little me, or to go back to being a workaholic. and forget the big picture about the meaning of life and what it's all about, so to say, that we had so clear recently. So I have a lot of exercises also to remind people of the values that I have gotten in touch with and the wisdom that I have felt and known, and how to integrate those places when they're dealing with different life circumstances, and how to bring that wisdom to the moment when you're losing perspective, when you're back into the matrix, so to say.
A lot of it's interesting. A lot of the things when I was reading on some of your counsels and that you use a lot of terms as far as computers, in integrating that whole idea of the matrix idea in the Western world. What are your thoughts as far as the actual experience itself, of the ayahuasca experience itself, and shattering that whole psyche of the Western world? What are your thoughts really on that?
It is amazing. I have experienced personally and witnessed such a transformation. I mean, I have watched clients who are computer geeks and spend their whole life slaving for a company come back and go, oh my God, I gotta build my life. What about my relationships? Why am I giving my whole life to this company? And then eventually, slowly change things about their lives. Or people who have been very fear-driven and very much in survivor mode and trying to avoid rocking the boat, so to say, or clinging to things out of fear, going like, oh yeah, I should celebrate my life. I should take my girlfriend around the world. There is like this is such a bigger place. Or also just the concept of the self and what we are. Because I know that even the death experience has widened in a huge way my experience of who I am and what this little avatar on planet Earth is. It felt like my planet Earth existence was so precious, so amazing, and in some ways was like playing Pac-Man in a huge computer of who I also was. So in some ways, I mean, it's amazing what she can do in the perspective of who you are, what the self is, what our personal consciousness is, what our human nature is, and how it's a small part of who we really are as multidimensional beings in some ways, and also what's really important.
Have you found that by studying with certain shamans and observing these states, when it comes to for example the different entities that these ayahuasqueros come in contact, through your experiences or through clients' experiences, do you notice that there are similar? I know as you're saying that most people will have a Western sort of cultural representation, but do you ever notice that they have Amazonian archetypes come in their visions despite being of a Western background?
Yeah, I know of people who do. I mean, the snake experience is very common. Seeing snakes, being eaten by snakes, by the way, that does not have to be a negative experience at all. Although it can be, and it's, I mean, I know some people are scared about it. Some people is like, oh, okay, the snake is about to eat me next experience. Also, I know people who turned into jaguars or turned into big jungle cats, or some people have a lot of like visions from the jungle. For me personally, it's often more visions from other realities. So it's less about animals in the jungle. It's more about beings from other planes sometimes, or experiences of other planes a lot of the time. And then usually there is a big personal piece. So some people also stay with the human existence and work mostly in personal issues in a huge context, in a very different context. And some people travel or go to different planes and interact with different entities too. So there is both.
Yeah, it's that whole aspect of it is always fascinated me. The shamanic artist Pablo Amaringo, I don't know if you're familiar with his work. His book Ayahuasca Visions, where he does paintings of his different ayahuasca visitations or whatever to other realities. He'll have weird motifs that he claims he encounters in every interaction with the medicine. And for example, he'll have like UFOs, like flying saucers, and it's like that's not even a part. Like things like that make me really curious. It's like, well, these people obviously didn't grow up with that sort of mythos as a indigenous part of their culture, or maybe they did, but it's fascinating that that's not something that's just obviously designated to the West. It's
Right.
certain motifs, or even the motif of the elf or the elven race. How different indigenous cultures all have experiences with things that are seemingly very, very similar, and then also within the visions themselves appear very similar. And that has always just fascinated me, that you talk to enough people, you start to see the archetypal backpinning of everything.
Yeah, and some repeating themes. And that's the thing with aliens or beings from other planes. They can, in my experience, there are two ways of interacting with them. Sometimes they can show up and be a part of your experience. They can come as teachers, they can come as supporters, so they can just be there. Or sometimes it can be scary, depending. And sometimes it's almost like they go from they merge with your identity. I know I've had ceremonies in which I became the alien, or at least some specific species. It was really beautiful, but they come from the inside of who you are versus as something to encounter. I have had some really beautiful experiences. It can be very fascinating. And on the other hand, also I have seen people, especially in Brazil, they work also a lot with possessions where there were some energies that were much darker, out of control. So just because something is a being from another plane doesn't mean that they're friendly, doesn't mean that they have your best interest in mind. Some of them absolutely do. And I also teach them tools how to kind of have a compass for what kind of energies you want to attract, and how to create filters and protection mechanisms to mostly draw in energies that are in your best interest and have your growth and the big picture of what's good for you in mind. And how to also, and if you do, also if they're darker entities, how to create protection, how to call in a protector spirit or a protector archetype to watch out over the interaction. Because they also have some interesting codes, and sometimes there is also interesting information to be gotten there, but it's to be handled with caution.
A lot of the experiences that I've read with ayahuasca, obviously, it's primarily for healing. I've read accounts of people, their cancer has been cured, arthritis has been cured. Incredible accounts. Have you ever seen that happen in any of the ceremonies you've been a part of, or in the conferences, people talking about those experiences?
Yeah, for sure. And also from psychological things, I know of somebody who had lifelong anxiety, and ayahuasca changed him to a different person. So now I know they were a nervous wreck. They're not a nervous wreck anymore. And I know how much of a nervous wreck they were. I know a lot of people who purging can have different forms, and sometimes purging is mostly physical, sometimes it's deeply metaphysical, and you can purge out issues. You can almost purge out parasitic energies that were attached to your cycle, and a lot of people feel so clean after certain purges. That I know of people who stopped smoking, who stopped alcohol, who stopped certain addictions. And I know for me, she has worked in different ways. Sometimes she has given me kind of more, there is the more symbolic healings, and other times she has been more like, if you want to make money here, if you want to know how to charge more, then you have to pay this person more. Or if you want to, or come on, like seriously, are you still saving money on vegetables when you don't need to? You got to eat organic, and you got to work out, because your savings account about like how fit you are from working out years ago is about to expire, so you have to put some working out into it. And as the eating organic works, you know what? I'm going to keep having to change your habits. I'm just going to change who you are. So from now on, you will naturally buy organic. And you work. I was like, thanks for the shortcut, because you can help me with the habits, or you can just work on identity level, so that from now on, then the identity is somebody who naturally wants to do different actions. And she's also huge about forgiveness. Like, I know that people have forgiven some really hard things to themselves and to people in their lives. So sometimes that alone can be amazing relief.
It's really interesting. I personally have never had the chance to do ayahuasca, but I've done a lot of psychedelic mushrooms, and it's funny that you brought up a lot of the reminders that the ayahuasca will give you, and kind of say, hey, you should be doing this. I always call mushrooms like the little helper that sits there and it says, hey, you're messing up here, or you should be doing this here, you should be being better at this in life, or this is lacking. And it almost, it's ironic because it seems like common sense after you've went through the experience, but I feel a lot of the reasons in this Western world is that we get detached from that, from ourselves, really. And it feels like these types of substances get us back in touch with ourselves, as ridiculous as that seems, that we would need something to do that for us. But it's a very natural process, with an ayahuasca or with a San Pedro or mushrooms or things like that.
They do also, ayahuasca and mushrooms have the thing in common that they come almost with something like a spirit of the plants. Mushrooms is almost like little creatures that are kind of funny. They're jokerish. They have sense of humor. They're like, wah ha 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 ha, you're fucking up here. Like, woo, you gotta do this. And ayahuasca is more like a loving grandma who kind of goes, you can go down that path, but I'm just saying you can also go here. And there is almost a feeling of feminine care and wisdom, and maybe that's why she's called the grandmother in a lot of tradition, because she comes like a loving grandma, while mushrooms are almost like this cheeky cousin who's gonna fuck with you with this great sense of humor in your best interest.
True. Yeah. I know that a lot of the shamans have used mushrooms in the past. How prevalent are they down in Peru?
I don't know. I actually don't have a lot of experience with mushrooms in Peru. So I know that, in Mexico, that's also part of the healing culture in some ways, but I'm not quite sure about Peru. I couldn't answer that.
When you do, well, when you see a lot of these healings, like especially with alcoholism and drug abuse and things like that, do you see ayahuasca in the same way in which when Stan Groff was doing his LSD psychotherapy and the model that he created for that, could you see, I've read some accounts in Brazil that they are using it in clinical settings, but do you see that as being as useful and as therapeutic for people as the LSD sessions were back when Stan was doing that?
I know the Stan's model has a lot of correlations to different states of the pregnancy, and I actually many years ago, like over 10 years ago, used to work with a therapist who was using mushrooms as a healing modality in also therapy context. And I did go into the belly, and I did realize that some of my deeper traumas were during the pregnancy. I remember calling my mom afterwards going like, hey, I know you did this and this and this when you were pregnant, but that was bigger. What else did you do? And her telling me, I was like, oh, I didn't tell you about this, like suicide attempt and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, no, you didn't, but now it makes sense. On the other hand, I think it's much bigger. Like the information we get in touch with is much bigger than the stages of pregnancy. And some of the states he describes is also how some of the ones with the oneness and oceanic bliss, and which is also some of the different stages. But I think the model is humongous, and the experience is possible with ayahuasca, and the realms that can be touched and the healing that can be done it has so many different aspects and so many different faces. So in some ways, I resonated deeply with Stan Groff's work, and there is even more.
Would you say though that maybe not so much in his specific model of the basic prenatal matrices, but just in a clinical setting where you would be in a room, sort of how he designed the room before you would take the LSD. Do you think that ayahuasca could work in that sort of a setting, and having a sitter there, and so helping people get through some of the more difficult experiences they're having, guiding them? Do you think that type of a model could work as a Western sort of alternative to regular psychotherapy?
I wouldn't say alternative, and that's the thing. It works as a beautiful combination. I think the model is super useful, and in some ceremonies, that is almost the group version of that. And the shaman is the seater, and there are many helpers who are there to stay sober enough that they can deal with people having difficult experiences. But I think it's not even instead. I mean, you're kind of putting it a little bit in either or terms, and I think that it works best when it's combined, because it's also useful to have. I know that in some of those sessions you do work before and work after the medicine experience, because there is a lot to prepare in advance, and which things you want to work with and how to resource yourself, and then afterwards how to integrate. So I wouldn't say alternative to psychotherapy, but amazing addition. I know that with one of my clients who I mentioned about ayahuasca, after a year, something working together, and then he went down to Peru and had some experience and came back and was an amazing accelerator. It was like, it was such an addition to the psychotherapy we were doing. When at some point he was going like, Meriana, why didn't you tell me about it earlier? That's like so amazing. And I mean, I know that I remember telling him that when he came, he was suicidal. We had to put him on meds, get him off meds so he can do ayahuasca. So in some ways, there is also places where I wouldn't recommend people to work with the medicine yet. And then there is also places where it can be such an accelerator. But also being in the context of using it together with therapy is much more powerful than just drinking by itself without the framework and the support.
Do you see that happening in the West anytime soon? Do you see it being legalized for therapeutic use?
I hope so. I know that in some ways there are some churches who are more allowed to work with it and who will have some legal protection under the church laws. I don't know how realistic it is to expect it to be legalized for therapeutic use. I would really hope so, because in some ways, I mean, acid is amazing. It can open different doorways, but it's kind of cold, and there is a way in which it doesn't give a fuck. It's like, okay, here's you. That's what you are. These are your negative programs. Okay, deal with it. Yeah, and ayahuasca comes with this fear. It comes with a really caring entity who kind of also helps you guide and it brings it quicker to a frequency of love, which I think acid doesn't have, or maybe because of its chemical nature. It's an amazing doorway opener, but the lack of the particular spirit makes it very much like, if it's hard, deal with it. And if you have some cracks, then walk with them, you have some cracks. And almost it can be a little rude.
How open do you think is the psychology community to the kind of work that you do, the kind of work that others do, that use entheogens in general? Like, what's the level of openness there is, or is it, very underground? Or
it depends probably where too. I mean, I'm in the Bay Area, which is one of the most progressive areas in America. I wouldn't say what the psychologist community in Texas is like. I know that at the California Institute of Integral Studies, where I did my master's, they were very open. There's some professors who were going down to do research and to plug people in during ayahuasca experience to take breast and brain scans and so on. So I know that some areas are much more open than others, but I couldn't talk about the psychology community as a whole. I think it is becoming more and more well known how powerful it can be, and on the other hand, I know that I don't know how much there is actual research about certain aspects, so that will be also interesting, but I couldn't speak about the psychology community as a whole. I know that in the Bay Area, people are extremely open and very embracive of it, also including a lot of the therapists here.
It's interesting also, if you go down to the indigenous peoples, how, from what I've always heard, they follow their own Amazonian style relationship with the brew. But what are their opinions on the Eastern perspective? Does it relate at all to the revelations they get on ayahuasca, say like a Buddhist understanding of non-duality, or do they just sort of have their own overall different relationship to it?
I think often they have their own overall different relationship to it, which still has a lot to do with the spirits of this and the spirits of that. On the other hand, I have worked with one Peruvian shaman who was mostly doing San Pedro, who had a lot of background in Buddhism and non-duality, and the way he used some of those Buddhist stories and short little anecdotes about the Buddha and about stories of consciousness, it was amazing. And it was so, I remember being in such a I was like an enlightened baby in one of that ceremony, and just like the truth of his stories and the humor and the way he was bringing it with the wisdom of consciousness from the Buddhist traditions, I had to laugh so hard from just how deeply true they were. So I saw it as an amazing combination, although not a lot of people use it, and it takes special knowledge to do so. And I also use a lot of the non-dualistic tools in the toolkit I work with people, because sometimes it's much easier to deal with extremely difficult experiences if you become the witness, or if you become the screen in which experience is being projected on moment to moment to moment versus stay with the content. So they're also, and also remember the very first ayahuasca ceremony I had, she took all my knowledge from spirituality, and I had studied with a whole bunch of masters, read a whole bunch of books in non-dualism. I had been to Pune and then workshops there, and also had read a lot about channels things. And she basically took all these concepts and started explaining me how it works. And I remember her saying that thing that they say about being in the moment. So that's what it is. You take the moment, you become extremely present to it. And when I did it, it became this humongous doorway to so many parallel worlds. I was like, wow, that's what they do with the present in the moment. And then she was going, so that thing they're talking about, silence and stillness in the Buddhist traditions, this is what it is. And then it was giving me almost direct downloads about concepts that I knew, but I had not really deeply gotten in my body, and also like explaining it to a whole new level, and also ways of how we're all one, the nature of consciousness, and some of them were directly taken from Buddhist traditions that I had some background in, but she kind of took the concepts and gave me the download of what it really means. It was pretty amazing. I think it's an amazing combination.
Yeah, absolutely. And it kind of, it's awesome that us in the West are able to take, two distinctly different methods and to sort of combine them and come up with a new synthesis. It's sort of like the next phase of these practices or modalities.
I mean, I think a lot of the yogis also were using all kinds of things in some ways. I don't know what Soma was, but I mean, there are a lot of theories about what Soma was, and I know that they were using ephedra a lot, for example, for concentration practices, which makes sense if you're going to be staring at your belly button for 5 hours. It helps.
Very true, very true, yeah. Yeah. We actually had a long conversation about the Soma just recently. It's another use of these ethnogenic natural substances, in terms of spiritual work and personal healing work, and I find it fascinating. It seems like these experiences are very healing, very empowering. I feel like it's very empowering to people, especially because, it seems to me that so many people feel alienated, and, people are confused, and it feels like, from what you've said, your clients, they come back with this feeling of personal empowerment, and I think that's wonderful.
Yeah, and recognizing like how much they live in fear and how not to do that, and also about identity in general. I remember one of my most powerful ayahuasca experiences explaining me how little power we have on Earth about to influence the quality of what we really are. I remember her saying, you can be like the Mother Teresa and do everything right and do sacrifice yourself for humanity and do good deed after good deed, and you can barely improve who you really are. Or you can be Hitler and rape and plunder, and you can barely scratch the surface of making it worse of who you really are. So do good, but have fun with it. And so it was like also she can really challenge some of the fear-based or concepts about that a lot of people are. I mean, it's almost the software that we're running. I know I use a lot of computer terms, but she can do serious reboots of our psychological software and what's really important and how to arrange ourselves. I mean, what to center our existence around. that is most true to our nature.
Well, Meriana, I know we're almost out of time. Why don't you tell us a little bit about some of your upcoming workshops and your practice and how people can get in touch with you if they'd like to, if they're interested?
Mm-hmm. My website is merianadinkova.com, and I think you guys are going to post the link with the description of the podcast.
Yeah.
And my email is merianadinkova@gmail.com, so people are welcome to contact me. And in July, the workshop is going to be from July 26th to August 2nd in a retreat center close to Iquitos with Ricardo Amaringo, who has been working for way over 20 years and is one of the most respected and well-known shamans of his generation. I'm really looking forward to working with him. And the next two retreats, the one in July and the one in December, and they're going to be all-inclusive, so everything is included in the price. It's going to come with the accommodation, with the food, with doing different, the one in December specifically, we're going to do different tours. There's going to be also kayaking things, so it's going to be a combination of being in nature and working with ayahuasca with really experienced shamans with a lot of experience and doing daily workshops. So
yeah, that
to
sounds
find
fantastic.
out, yeah, and you can. They're right now. They're on the event page on my website, and sometimes I have different events listed. So if you can scroll down to get to them, though right now they're on the top. And they're also, I do Facebook events. But if somebody has questions, they can contact me directly, and I'm happy to tell them more about the two upcoming retreats. The one in December would be on December 14th to the 21st, and if people have had some medicine work experience or they're about to go to a retreat in Peru. I have worked also with people who are about to go to a retreat and wanted to have some guidance, or people who have had some bad experiences with shamans and were going to go to another retreat and wanted to get some support, or people who have done work before and want to make sure that they don't forget about the wisdom and the knowledge that they got in touch with and want to work with somebody to keep them on track. I'm open to work with people from all over the world and over Skype usually, and that's some of my favorite clients. So I'm welcoming people to reach out to me. I can do a short free phone consultation or Skype consultation, and I'm very interested in working with people who are doing that kind of work and are on that path.
Great.
So
how many people do you usually take on your retreats, by the way?
Usually we're 12 of us, or 12 to 15.
Okay.
So it's good to keep the group relatively small to have also more personal experience, to have a way to go deeper with everybody's stuff. I know that the one in December, the shaman is open to working with 20. He has a lot of experience of working with big groups, and he has a really good team of helpers. So he was opening it to up to 20, but usually it's also good to have it intimate. So.
Sure. All right. Well, thanks a lot, Meriana. I mean, it was a good conversation. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, guys.
And those links will be up on the video, everyone. So if you need to get in contact with Meriana, you can do it that way. Thanks a lot for listening.